I sat there, my gaze fixed on her, waiting for the weight of her words to settle in her own mind. Her arms were crossed, chin slightly raised, exuding an air of confidence, as if she truly believed I would crumble beneath the force of her ultimatum. Obey or forget about intimacy. It wasn't the statement itself that struck me. It was her unwavering belief that this tactic would work, that I would plead, surrender, or at the very least, scramble to prove myself worthy of the affection she held hostage. And that was the moment it all clicked. This wasn't just a heated argument born from a disagreement that had spiraled out of control. No, this was something far more insidious, a recurring pattern, a cycle of manipulation veiled as marital discord. And I had been caught in it for far too long. I laughed, a genuine, amused laugh, the kind that escapes when something is so utterly ridiculous that it barely feels real. Her eyes widened for a brief second, caught off guard by my reaction, but she quickly masked it with a scowl. "What's so funny?" she snapped. Leaning back, I let the last of my amusement fade before meeting her gaze. "Perfect. Keep it forever." She blinked, processing my words, waiting for me to take them back, to explain that I didn't mean it, that I was just speaking in anger. But I wasn't angry. I wasn't even hurt. I was simply done. Without another word, I stood up, grabbed my phone from the table, and walked out of the room. No shouting, no dramatic exit, just a quiet, resolute departure. For the first time in our relationship, I felt no need to justify myself, no urge to argue my perspective, to make her see where she was wrong. Let her sit with it. Let her realize that this time, her tactics had no effect. I entered the bedroom, grabbed a pillow and a blanket, and moved into the guest room. No slammed doors, no passive-aggressive remarks, just space. She didn't follow. Not immediately. She probably assumed I just needed time to cool off, that in a few hours I'd return, apologize, and try to smooth things over. Maybe she expected me to negotiate, to offer some compromise in exchange for the intimacy she was withholding. But she had nothing I wanted anymore. Lying in the guest bed, staring at the ceiling, the realization settled over me. I wasn't afraid of losing her. I was relieved. The next morning, I woke up early, feeling lighter than I had in years. There was no tightness in my chest, no pit in my stomach, no pressure to repair what she had deliberately broken. When I entered the kitchen, she was already at the table, arms folded, an expectant look on her face. She was waiting for me to bring up the previous night. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat down across from her, completely unbothered. She cleared her throat. "So, are you done acting childish?" I took a slow sip, letting the silence stretch. Then, with an easy smile, I said, "Yeah, actually I am." Her eyes narrowed, uncertainty flickering behind them. She was waiting for the argument, the plea, the negotiation. None came. I finished my coffee, stood up, and walked away. That was the first crack in her confidence. The moment she sensed something had shifted. She didn't understand it yet, but this was the beginning of the end. She wasn't equipped to handle silence. For years, our conflicts had followed the same script. She would push, I would resist, she would escalate, and eventually I would cave. Whether by apologizing just to end the fight or conceding to her demands to avoid prolonged tension, I had always given in. But this time, I gave her nothing. No reaction, no anger, no desperate attempts to mend what she had torn apart. I simply disengaged. I went about my day as if nothing had happened, left the house without offering an explanation, returned without seeking her out. When I spoke, it was only when necessary, brief, neutral, devoid of emotion, and she hated it. At first, she pretended indifference, rolled her eyes when I passed by without acknowledging her, scoffed when I ignored her passive-aggressive remarks. But after a couple of days, the cracks in her composure started to show. The first real sign of panic came when she decided to test me. I was in the living room, absent-mindedly scrolling through my phone, when she entered and sank onto the couch across from me. She didn't speak right away. just sat there, waiting for me to acknowledge her. When I didn't, she let out a dramatic sigh. "So, this is how it's going to be now," she finally said. I didn't even look up. "What are you talking about?" My tone was flat. "This whole ignoring me thing. You think this is normal?" I glanced at her briefly. "I'm not ignoring you." "Oh, really?" "Because it sure feels like it." I shrugged. "I'm just done wasting energy on pointless conversations." Her jaw tightened. "Oh, I see. So because you didn't get your way, now you're sulking?" I actually laughed at that. A tantrum? I'm the calmest I've ever been. She wasn't prepared for this. She was used to me trying to fix things, taking the blame for problems she had caused, letting her maintain control. But now, she had nothing. The real shift happened later that evening. After dinner, she lingered by the sink, waiting for me to say something. I could feel her desperation growing. Normally, this would be the moment I'd cave, attempt to patch things up, pretend like everything could go back to the way it was. Instead, I simply picked up my glass of water, took a sip, and walked out of the kitchen without a word. That was the moment she realized she was no longer in control. The silence between us wasn't just an absence of words. It was a fundamental change in how I approached my life. I had nothing left to say to her, nothing left to fight for. But for the first time in years, I had someone else to focus on, myself. I didn't make any grand declarations. I didn't sit her down and say, "I'm changing my life." No, I just started living differently, without her permission, without her validation, and without hesitation. The first thing I did was fix my sleep. I had spent too many nights lying awake, replaying arguments in my mind, bracing for the next inevitable fight. Now, I went to bed early, in my own space, and woke up feeling clear-headed for the first time in years. Then I started working out. I joined a gym nearby. Nothing fancy, just a place where I could lift sweat and rebuild myself from the inside out. That first week was brutal. My muscles ached in ways I hadn't felt in years. But I welcomed the pain. Every sore muscle was a sign of progress, a reminder that I was reclaiming my power in a way she couldn't manipulate. She noticed, of course. I could feel her watching me when I came home from workouts, sweat-drenched and breathing hard. At first, she acted indifferent, but her eyes always flicked toward me whenever I grabbed my gym bag or downed a protein shake. I started dressing better. Not for her, not for anyone else, but for myself. I got rid of old clothes I clung to for too long and replaced them with things that actually made me feel good. I got a proper haircut, not just the half-hearted trims I used to settle for. When I looked in the mirror, I started recognizing myself again. Then I started going out. At first, it was small things. Grabbing a coffee alone, taking long walks, reconnecting with friends I had lost touch with. But soon, I started truly living again. I said yes to invitations I once would have declined. I went to bars, met new people. And every time I stepped outside that door, I felt a little freer. The more I focused on myself, the less space she occupied in my mind. And that's when she truly started to panic. She could feel her grip on me slipping, and she didn't know how to handle it. At first, she tried to pretend nothing had changed. She played it off like she didn't care, rolling her eyes whenever I stepped out, throwing out sarcastic comments about my workout routine, or scoffing as I passed by in a freshly pressed outfit. But I saw through it. The small cracks in her confidence each time she noticed I wasn't reacting. Then the shift began. It started subtly. One evening, as I moved past her to grab something from the kitchen, she brushed against me, something she hadn't done in weeks. A few nights later, she lingered in the doorway of my new bedroom, leaning against the frame like she had something to say. But she didn't. She just waited, expecting me to invite her in. I didn't. Then she pushed further. One morning, as I laced up my shoes, ready to leave for the gym, she spoke in a tone almost hesitant. "You've been out a lot lately." I grabbed my bag, meeting her gaze. Yeah, she hesitated. Doing what? Exactly? I smirked. Living? That struck her. I saw it in the way her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to shoot back with something sharp but couldn't find the words. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She was meant to hold the power, to keep me seeking her approval, craving her attention. But now, she was the one left wondering where I was going, what I was doing, and, most importantly, who I was with. The grip she had over me had slipped away. She tried to pull me back in the only way she knew how. One night, as I stood in the kitchen, she leaned against the counter beside me, fingers tapping idly, too forced to be casual. "You know," she started, her voice laced with something dangerously close to desperation. "We don't have to do this. It doesn't have to be this way." I didn't reply. I let the silence stretch between us. She shifted closer. "I miss you." That was new. I turned to her, my expression unreadable. "Miss me?" I repeated, as if the idea itself was foreign. She nodded, reaching out, letting her fingers graze down my arm. The same woman who once used affection as leverage, now offering it freely. I let the touch linger for a moment before gently pulling away. Without a word, I grabbed my glass of water and left the room. That was the moment she understood she had lost. But she didn't give up so easily. After I pulled away that night, something inside her shifted. The active indifference she once wore like armor was gone. Now, she was in full damage control mode. She started trying harder. At first, it was subtle, positioning herself near me more often, casually sitting a little closer on the couch, asking questions about my day when we both knew she never truly cared before. When I didn't take the bait, she escalated. One evening, as I was getting ready to head out, she leaned against my bedroom doorway, my room, not ours anymore, watching as I adjusted my watch. "You're going out again?" I didn't even glance at her. "Yeah." "With who?" I smirked to myself, fixing my sleeve. "Does it matter?" That hit her, and I saw it. Her fingers curled tightly around the doorframe. "I just think it's strange. You never used to go out this much." I turned to her, my expression unreadable. "Yeah, well, there's a lot I never used to do." She stared at me, waiting, hoping for something, anything that suggested I wasn't really slipping away. But I gave her nothing. I grabbed my keys, walked past her, and left without another word. The power she once had over me, it was gone. And somewhere deep down, she knew it. But instead of accepting it, she had one last tactic left: guilt. A few days later, I walked into the house to find her seated at the table, hands clasped together, waiting for me. I nearly kept walking, but before I could, she spoke up. "Can we talk?" I sighed. I knew where this was going, but I sat down anyway, resting my hands on the table. "Go ahead." She hesitated, inhaling a shaky breath. "I don't know what's happening between us." I raised a brow. "Really?" She ignored the sarcasm. I don't want to fight anymore." I tilted my head slightly. "This isn't a fight. It's just reality finally catching up to you." Something flickered in her eyes, panic. "It doesn't have to be like this. We can fix things. I know I haven't been perfect, but—" "Stop." She flinched. Not because I had raised my voice, but because I wasn't following the script she had written in her head. I exhaled, leaning back in my chair. "You want the truth." She nodded, clinging to what she thought was her last chance. "I don't want this anymore." Silence. Her lips parted as if to argue, but no words came out. I leaned forward, my voice calm. "I don't hate you. I don't even care enough to be angry. But I see you for who you are now, and I'm done pretending this marriage is anything more than a prison I let myself stay in for too long." Her breath hitched. "So that's it? You're just giving up?" I shook my head. "No, I'm finally choosing myself." Then I stood up, grabbed my phone from the counter, and dialed a number. When she heard the words, "I'd like to schedule a consultation with a divorce attorney," she finally shattered. But by then, It wasn't my problem anymore. She cried, pleaded, tried every trick she had left to make me reconsider. But it was too late. As the divorce process unfolded, she swung between extremes. Some days furious, hurling accusations as if they could undo everything. Other days playing the victim, acting as though she was the one being abandoned. Neither approach worked. I had nothing left to give her. And the best part? I didn't feel guilty. Not even for a second. The man I used to be would have agonized over this, doubted himself, wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was still something worth saving. But now I felt nothing but relief. Before the paperwork was even finalized, I moved out, packed my things in silence while she stood in the doorway, watching. "This isn't fair," she whispered. "You're just walking away like I meant nothing to you." I zipped my suitcase, turned to her, my expression unreadable. "No, I'm walking away, because I finally realized I meant nothing to you." She opened her mouth, but I didn't wait for her response. I picked up my bag, stepped past her, and left that house, our house, for good. Life after her? It was better than I ever imagined. I got my own place, a space that was finally mine. No tension, no manipulation, no more walking on eggshells. Just peace. I kept working out, kept dressing well, kept saying yes to new experiences. I met new people, went on dates, not to prove anything but because I could, and I thrived. Meanwhile, she didn't. Word trickled back through mutual acquaintances. She wasn't handling the divorce well. She was spiraling, pretending she was fine when everyone could see she wasn't. She had spent so long controlling me that she never considered what would happen when I was gone. Now, she was the one drowning in regret. But I never looked back. Not once. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to see her suffer. I didn't even care what she did anymore, because I was free, and that was all that ever mattered.